Okay, so I originally heard that customer experience, the idea behind customer experience is a bit like hosting a party. So there are some people who host parties for their guests, and there are other people who host parties for themselves, the host. Can you talk to us a little bit about customer experience and how we've seen this shift from companies being product centric into really moving and focusing in on that experience?
Sure. Well, I think it's an interesting analogy to talk about how customer experiences, in a way, it's hosting a party. I mean, it used to be that a long time ago, you talk about maybe 20 years ago, or even maybe as recently as 10, 15 years ago, companies very much were they had basically what you would say is like the power. They had the position where they could actually dictate the price. They could actually dictate how they interact with company or with the customers. Companies and customers had no choice but to deal with however the company wanted to provide products and services. Now, obviously, with empowered customers that have the power to check up prices on their mobile phone, to look around and blog about bad customer service, and there's a whole universe of information available out there. Now companies have no choice but to actually listen to now what their customers are saying and asking from them. And so essentially we've seen the power shift from companies that had the power and they were the hosts, so to speak, to actually you have no choice now but to listen, to create a party or to create a product or a service that is aligning with the expectations and needs of the people that were going to be attending the party. And so as a customer now, I think there's probably never been a better time to actually be able to dictate what it is that you want from the companies that you spend your money with. So if it's a hassle for you to subscribe and you need to go through 5 different pages to do that, and then you need to print it out and sign it and mail it back in, I mean, obviously, basically people's patience with that type of bad customer service has shrank dramatically. So obviously now you have people that they see that there's an issue on the website or the mobile site, they'll easily go to their competitor of yours. And so as a result, companies, unfortunately, the old way of doing business, where they used to plan for a long time and then they basically their product innovation was slow and everything, they had the time and the luxury to basically create products and services for customers. But now customers are changing, so their expectations are evolving so rapidly that companies have no choice but to be more nimble and be more agile and they have to be quicker to change as the customer's expectations are evolving. I don't know if that fully answered your question, but that's where
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so this is essentially, going to guide us through the next hour. There's so much to unpack. So let's deep dive in some of those things. So, one of the first things that you mentioned is that like everyone's doing it, right? Okay, so we've seen that there's a business case behind moving from a product centric organization to an experience centric organization. Talk to us a little bit about how, if it's kind of become industry standard, how we can then still differentiate ourselves, how we can still make the case for customer experience within our organization. And yeah, so maybe let's begin there. If everyone's doing it, doesn't it then become the same, or how do we then differentiate ourselves?
Right. Well, I think there's a difference between everyone saying that they're doing it and actually everyone actually doing it.
Actually doing
it. So when I used to be an analyst at Forrester, so I was leading the innovation and design thinking practice for Forrester out of San Francisco. And so it was a global role. So I looked at global companies around the world. And so at Forrester, they had it was called the Customer Experience Index, which basically was an objective benchmark of about 700 brands around the world that would basically objectively use an algorithm to gauge how well their customer experience was year on year. And literally when I was there for basically almost the 5 years that I was there, every single year the Customer Experience Index barely moved. And so basically the improvements were relatively flat. But every time you go to an event, there's more people with head of customer experience, and this person says customer experience insights, and this person is chief customer officer. Well, all these people are investing in it, but why is the customer experience not improving? And the reason is because it's really hard to do. And it's not just as easy as saying, okay, well, we'll do one project to make our website easier for customers to manage interacting with us. It's actually now you have to worry about the website, you have to worry about the call center, you have to worry about your brand and marketing, you have to worry about how happy are your employees are working for you. You have to worry about how your products, how people are giving feedback and talking about your products and your services on blogs that you don't even own. So it's all all unpaid and unknown media. So I mean, it's really a gigantic, enormous task for companies to try to make sure that they're managing all of these different outlets and these channels. And I think that really is the opportunity for certainly consultants to help them with these bits, but it's also the challenge for these people that are trying to manage this, to try to do it and orchestrate positive experiences across all of that ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. One, what you just brought up about your time at Forrester, and you wrote a white paper while you were there, or a thought leadership paper on metrics about the return on investment of design thinking, which to my knowledge is still one of the only papers out there that really addresses metrics in terms of design thinking and innovation. And I think when we have these conversations around customer experience or innovation, the first kind of thing that we have to talk about, well, not even the first thing, but one of those things that then pops up is often the idea of metrics. Well, what do we include? What don't we? How do we know we're doing a good job? How don't we? So if we take even, for example, what you just mentioned with, if for, everyone's now, customer experience officer, however, then, that we're not seeing any, movement of the needle. Can you talk to us about what are either the metrics, or what are some of those things that the companies could be doing that might end up having an impact or might influence the gauge or the customer experience index? And the second thing is that when we're mapping something as sometimes intangible about as metrics or as a customer experience, how do we go about breaking it down and making sure that when we're finished, with the project or with the engagement, whatever it is, that we can say, we've reached our metrics, we did a good job?
Well, so basically, you don't want to get into a situation where you're just measuring just to measure. And so I think that that's what a lot of companies do, is they basically say, okay, well, we need to be measuring something. So let's just get an NPS, and let's just try to focus all of our exercises in measuring things around NPS. So NPS, if you think about it, it's a rather blunt instrument. So it basically says, okay, if I was to go to the doctor and they said, okay, you have a fever. Okay, that means my NPS score is bad. But it doesn't tell me, okay, what, do I have an ear infection, or do I have cancer? Do I have tonsillitis? Is my arm broken? It's like, what's the matter with me? And so that's why having like a beacon metric, we say beacon metric, is that high level metric. In the end, it's really not all that useful, to be honest. So oftentimes when companies are relatively immature with customer experience, they may just select one beacon metric and they say, okay, we're going to measure towards that. But then they realize that it's not granular enough or actionable enough to actually say, okay, if I do X, then I'm going to expect this type of return, Y. So what they find out that they need to do is they need to be very surgical about measuring the right things at the right time, because you don't want to continue just to survey people and not do anything with the data, because people just become there. We go through survey fatigue, and all of a sudden they say, God, I'm taking so many surveys that, it doesn't actually offer any real insight. So if, for example, you make a tweak on the website, then you need to have a survey just specifically about that tweak on the website. And then once you get enough feedback from that, then you stop. Then you're doing something else. And so what you measure basically actually has to align with whatever the overarching business goals of the organization are. So if the organization says, okay, we need to, by 2025, we're going to be, we're going to have 20 million new customers. Well, then obviously, if you're thinking about acquiring new customers, then everything that you're measuring needs to make sure that you are accurately contributing to that overarching corporate goal. So if the corporate goal is, okay, customer acquisition, then say, okay, if we tweak something on the website or if we improve the call center, then how is that going to acquire new customers? And so aligning that measurement with the overarching, what basically your president or your CEO says to in the annual report or on investor meetings, for example, aligning that will tell you if you're actually making progress or not.
Think that that's so important and really gives us a lot of insight into really maybe what's the bigger question, which is when we do approach customer experience, it's not simply like isolated initiatives. The reason that we're committing or we're investing to customer experience is because it has to make sense in the larger business strategy or the larger business goals. How do you map that relationship between the customer experience that you're designing and also the larger business goals?
Right. So you have to remember that when you are working in a customer experience practice, that you're not actually doing things in isolation. So you're not actually just saying, okay, we're going to do a journey map of what the sales process looks like and how customers are contacted after a sale is made. For example, okay, well, that's great that you need to do that, but how does that then tie back to the bigger picture? What are you trying to achieve as a customer experience practice? Because essentially, a lot of people will look at customer experience practice as a cost center, which in a more traditional or immature organization, generally it is seen as a cost center. Usually, customer experience starts in the marketing department. And then once they realize, wow, actually, it's more than just marketing. It's actually across operations, it's across sales, it's across HR, it's across everything. And so you see that companies, once they start with a customer experience practice, that starts in marketing and then goes and actually gets anchored right underneath the CEO and actually has influence and authority across all the different business units. So once you see that, then you say, okay, we are doing customer journey mapping for this particular interaction that customers have with us. But okay, you realize that that's not just, we're not just doing that as part of improving customer experience across those one or two touch points. It actually ties into, okay, the reason we're doing this is because we prioritize this area of the business as having the highest impact for the customer experience and the business. And so all of a sudden now that actually piece of customer experience becomes more than just the small activities that you're doing. So I think a key part of that is, so, and to answer your question, generally people will start with, you have the corporate strategy, and then within that the corporate strategy and the corporate vision is the overarching umbrella of where the company's going. Within that, then you have a customer experience practice, and they have a customer experience vision. And that vision says, okay, what is the intended experience that we want to deliver to our customers? And so customers, if they say, okay, the company says we want to be the most transparent organization in Australia, then the customer experience vision is, okay, we want to deliver an experience that customers feel that we're super transparent and that we give them information and that we are, we're not hiding anything. So then from there, that vision then creates a strategy, and those strategy are the individual activities that you need to do to actually realize that vision. And those activities are prioritized based on the impact to the customer, the impact to the business, and then really the feasibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I always find it so interesting how, as you mentioned, that investing in customer experience often can help you redesign or rethink or even restructure your organization, because you begin with your organization in a certain way, And then as time goes on, and then as you do dig a little bit deeper when it comes to customer experience and the touch points, as you mentioned, with the customer, sometimes it's the customer that actually gives you that information back and says, no, I don't have any contact with this person or that person, I want to speak to this person. But your organization says, you should be connected, A and B are connected, but really the customer says, I need A and C to be connected. So I find it so interesting that the feedback from the customer is not only on the product or the service that you're offering. Often it gives you such insight into the actual structure of your organization and how to close those gaps as well.
Absolutely. I think so. It's certainly a good place to start. So companies that are looking to improve their customer experience, oftentimes is to look across the organization, and there may be blind spots or areas that they didn't even notice, and identifying those gaps and doing a gap analysis, saying, okay, well, our front end experience is quite good and customers love it, but on this part of our experience, maybe the back end, the invoicing or the finance or something to do with it, maybe there's some issues there, and that needs to be focused. So then that gap analysis allows you to identify areas to improve. I often liken this to, if I can just say, I liken this to cooking a steak, for example. Even though I'm vegetarian, if I was to cook a steak, for example, inside, oftentimes the middle of the steak is frozen, right? It's a frozen middle. But then the upper part of the steak, which is the senior management, it gets well grilled, right? Because it's like you're grilling it. And then the other part, the lower part that's interacting with customers every day, they understand why customer experience is important. But the people in the middle of the organization, the middle management or the back office, those people are saying, well, why do we got to change what I do every day? Because what I do, I don't impact any customers. I don't have any customer relationships.
Yeah.
And then that's why when you have to scale customer experience on that whole organization, you have to take into consideration the frozen middle as well. So obviously that you have everyone working towards the same goal of creating, the right customer experience.
Yeah. Absolutely. Ryan, I think it's maybe time to open Pandora's box. So we're so lucky to have you, because not only do you have incredible experience and insights from working globally, you also have a lot of insight to Japan, and you also speak Japanese. Let's start opening a little bit the Pandora's box of, talk to us a little bit about where Japan is on the spectrum of maturity when it comes to customer experience. And talk to us a little bit about your what you've seen over the last couple of years, or since you kind of came back to Japan.
Right. So you want to talk? 日本語で話しますか?
No, next time. Let's do this one in English.
I'm just kidding. So actually, I wrote a report about, I think almost 4 years ago now, about omotenashi service culture in Japan. And so basically it's what the world can learn from Japan's omotenashi service culture, which is really about anticipating people's needs, and it's about providing this level of service. And it's really amazing that with all the years that I've been in Japan or connected to Japan, I've seen very little advancement or progress or maturity really in level of customer experience in Japan relative to the rest of the world. Yeah. And so I see you nodding, and I think you also agree. I think anecdotally, I mean, just trying to do anything on any website in Japan is an absolute, it's mind-boggling how unuser-friendly some of the websites are, and some of the mobile experiences. So unfortunately, I'm starting to see, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, I say fortunately, we're starting to see glimmers of hope. We see people that are starting to recognize that customer experience is not just having a call center. So I used to talk to Japanese companies about how's your customer experience? And they say, oh yeah, we have a call center. Okay, well, call center is one part of it, and that's customer service, but it's very different than what we would say in some of the other countries around what is really customer experience, which is much more sophisticated and advanced than that. And so I think we see glimmers of hope now that we're starting to see more and more big companies that are actually measuring customer experience now. We see both, I know for a fact, for example, JAL and ANA both now measure interactions with their customers, which I
Mm,
mean, a lot of airlines have been doing for a long time, and now actually just starting to happen in Japan.
mm-hmm.
You start also seeing some of the digital providers like Rakuten that's also now measuring. So I think measurement is really, it's actually the foundation for starting a customer
Right.
experience practice. So I think that to me gives me a lot of hope that actually things are changing for the better, and there might be some developing of customer experience maturity here in this market as well.
Mm. Interesting. There's, and the reason of course, I'm nodding along, very much agreeing with you. I've seen
Mhm.
almost the Japanese confuse customer experience almost for politeness. And I'm like, no, it's not about being polite. It's not
Mhm.
about being, you know, polite or using keigo when you're speaking to your customers, but it's about creating seamless, you know, purchasing possibilities on in an app and, you know, things like that.
Sure.
Um, if we speak a little bit about that, keeping that in mind, if we think about the maturity of the Japanese market and we think about, you know, global best practice when it comes to customer experience, what are some of those things that you would encourage not only Japanese, well, specifically Japanese organizations, but organizations maybe in the earlier maturity of customer experience in or
Mhm.
implementing customer experience in their organization? What are some of those things? So you mentioned metrics, but is there anything else that you'd encourage a particular organization to either highlight or kind of you know, put on the table as something to be aware of?
Sure. I think one also a very I would say it's less technical, but it's quite difficult in terms that it just takes a long time. But it's something that you're doing in parallel with everything else. And so once you are developing a vision and you're developing your strategy and you're actually measuring now customer experience, the long haul, or basically the what's going to take the longest time to transform, is your culture. And so
Wow.
the culture of the organization needs to become more focused around the needs of the customer. And
Mm-hmm.
so that starts with talking about the customer, thinking about, what are the needs of the customer, giving that feedback to other parts of the organization, so they also are seeing that what they're doing has an impact on the customer. I mean, a very simple example is how, Jeff Bezos, for example, the CEO of Amazon, he famously would always have an empty chair in his meetings.
Mm,
And they say, well, what is that chair for? And he said, well, that's the customer. The
that's the
customer sits in
customer.
that chair. And so anytime when someone would propose something or talk about something, he said, okay, well, what does the customer think about that? And
Mm,
so having that mindset and organically starting to actually change the culture to think about, it's not just about us doing all these activities to measure and everything for the company. We're
mm,
actually now, it's moving from what used to be inside out, now it's becoming outside in. And so we're taking feedback in um, expectations and understanding from the customer to influence what we do inside the organization. So
mm,
it's moving from inside out to outside in.
mm-hmm.
And I
I
think
think.
that
Mhm.
is something that I mean, oftentimes, it's you can't pivot. Obviously, you can't pivot the large freight liner on a dime. So you basically have to set the course and
Mm,
set that direction, and it takes years. And so
right.
we used to say that it takes 3 to 5 years maybe to change the culture. But you have to remember, people they've been hired in these jobs. Some of them have been working in these jobs for decades. They're not
Mm,
going to change within even 3 or 5 years. I remember when I interviewed at Microsoft in the U.S., they told me that it's going to take 7 to 10 years for them to change their culture at Microsoft. So I think it's a long process, and it always is something that you could start early, and then with the eye to change over time.
mhm. You even
Mhm.
mentioned at the beginning of our conversation about um, it's customer experience also is founded on kind of the ability to move quickly, embrace change, and kind of be a little bit more agile. And if we bring that kind of down to an organization, or if we, you know, apply that to an organizational perspective, and we think about, you know, for example, employee experience as well. So if we think
Mhm.
about how might we be able to educate employees, because you mentioned, for example, that frozen middle, how might we be able to in
Mhm.
our organizations to bring the importance importance of empathy, or the business case of empathy for the customer to the organizational level. So if we can talk about that, and also maybe even employee experience, because you mentioned that, happy employees equal happy customers. So maybe you can kind of just go with that and run with that for a little bit and talk us through some of your ideas.
Sure. Well, I think the importance of having happy employees cannot be understated. I think there's numerous research and reports that have shown that if you have any drop in the internal employee NPS score, that the external NPS score drops literally like several weeks after that, they're almost 1 in 1. So
Wow.
Focusing on having happy employees is really important. And so I think there's really two parts to that in actually transforming the culture. So one is really first setting that vision that's relevant for everyone in the organization. So if you say, okay, we're going to be the most, let's just use that example that I used before, say we're going to be the most transparent organization in all of Australia, then everyone in the organization has to know, well, what's in it for them. Right. Why do we all need to be transparent? So what's the benefit for me in my role? I'm just an underwriter, for example, or I just sit in the back office and I do IT. How does being transparent affect me? So it's basically about setting that goal. And oftentimes it's getting feedback from how that goal affects other parts of the organization and their roles, and then using that goal to actually align communications within the organization, to get feedback even internally, to understand how their role aligns with that vision is key. So everyone feels like they have skin in the game, so to speak.
Yeah.
The second part for transforming that is then to involve those people as much as possible in all of the other activities. So it's actually, so you do a customer journey mapping workshop, and it's not just about taking the people from marketing and doing the customer journey mapping workshop. It's, okay, you have someone from IT there, you have someone from HR, you have someone from the sales team, you have maybe some senior level people, you have some junior level people. So that diverse, what they call the Renaissance team. So that Bill Buxton basically used to be the senior engineer for Microsoft, and we call that the Renaissance team. So you have everyone from all these different backgrounds come together, and they basically bring in different perspectives and different ideas, and they also feel like they now are contributing to it as well. So involving those people also in the customer experience activities as well helps organically change the organization. And then if I was to add one more, one that just comes to mind is also the idea is that you start developing catalysts or champions across the organization that then become evangelists to go out and talk about it into other parts of the organization. So they said, hey, I was in a really great customer journey mapping workshop, and actually I learned this, this, and this. This is what customers are saying. And so when they go back into their little silo or their little business unit that maybe they felt they had no impact on the customer, they began saying, hey, you guys, we need to do things different because what we're doing impacts the customer as well. And so developing those catalysts across the organization is really important as well to organically change the culture.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because Japanese organizations are have been built around the idea of Renaissance teams, even from the beginning. Like even the way that the organization is structured is that everyone kind of joins at one time in the year. There's obviously certain issues with that. They join at one time in the year. And then we see, for example, that sales goes to IT for 3 months. And then an IT person goes, for example, to like the factory for 3 months. And we see, for example, them developing this empathy for the organization internally. However, I do think maybe that third point defines why, even though there's this idea that, multidisciplinary teams are stronger, I think the fact that there's no advocacy for champions, I think that could be maybe the reason why, even though the structure is a good idea, empathy for other areas of the organization, but there's none of that kind of, or there could be more role modeling when it comes to leadership of, transmitting insights from department to department, because it's often just, hey, go to sales and then come back to IT and get back to your job. But if maybe we did leverage that point of championing people a little bit more, inviting them to tell their stories, that we might be able to see that the culture then change a little bit more.
Right. I think you're right, Brittany. And if I can just build on that a little bit, what I would say is you also have, and maybe you know Japan very well. I think there's also an element here of the hierarchical managerial
Yeah.
positions here in
Mm-hmm.
Japan, where I feel like often they feel like the more senior you get, the more that they have the answers to everything, right? And I think it's empowering those people lower in the organization to maybe if they spend time in different parts of your organization, maybe even gone overseas and got an MBA
Mm.
or studied overseas, speak English or have some international perspective, maybe not even a Japanese, a foreigner in the organization, also leveraging that perspective as well to say, yes, okay, we're bringing diverse perspectives in there and everyone has a voice. Everyone should
Yeah.
be able to have some say in what the direction that we're going to go as an organization.
Mm.
And without that, unfortunately, uh, I think what we see is that a lot of Japanese organizations are
Mm.
stay kind of stuck in the mud, so to speak,
Mm.
in terms of innovating new products and services because they just don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, when we were preparing for this interview, you said something to me that I had never thought about, and I'm not even going to try to do it justice. So I'm going to hand it over to you, which
Mhm.
is
Okay.
tell me a little bit about, or explain to us a little bit about the theory or your thoughts behind that. There's this natural gravitation for Japanese organizations to move towards AI and machine learning rather than customer experience.
Right. So if you think about this is I think whilst it is my own hypothesis, I think more and more we're also seeing this in actually market data as well. And what we've seen is that I think Japanese in general, their education system is very much based on almost an engineering mindset. I mean, so it's like developing a very structured engineering approach to problem solving, which I think there certainly is a time and place for that. But unfortunately, when you look at that very structured engineering type approach to problem solving, and I'll hesitate to say it's almost like a waterfall methodology, it conflicts with the idea of an agile, customer centric design thinking type mindset. Because this is you may have an ambiguous result. You're not really sure which direction you're going to go. You have to do this beginning discovery phase, which could be quite vague and
Mm.
to many times Japanese will seem like, well, what are we doing? What are we going to build? I'm not really sure. So it's almost like it conflicts with this idea that we have a plan, we know how many people are going to be involved, we have a
Mm.
budget, and we know exactly what we're going to make. Problem is when you do that, your customers' expectations have evolved probably, 5 times since the final until the final product comes out. So
Right.
all of a sudden, you need to be faster to market. So I feel like for Japanese companies, the idea of building things and actually using things to solve problems such as AI and such as machine learning or other emerging technologies actually allows them to use that in engineering mindset to actually create something to help solve the problem. So you actually, it's not it's not like vague, this vague kind of you know, essence of an idea that says, okay, we need to think about the customer. It's actually we build something that's actually going to help us understand the customer. And so I think
Mm.
culturally, I think what I've seen is emergent technology seems to fill that gap. I think in um, really the way the rest of the world thinks about customer experience and the way Japan thinks about customer experience.
Hmm. So interesting. So where do you think kind of we go from here? Is it, we try to it's almost, you kind of got two options. One is you kind of push the customer experience story, or maybe, is there even a way that we can take this engineering mindset and then work with that and try to build the customer experience in line with what's maybe already already kind of naturally already there?
Sure. Well, I certainly don't want to throw any water on the engineering mindset. I think a lot of great advancements and a lot of great things come from that. And I encourage
Absolutely.
people to be, if they're smart and they want to follow the engineering path, that's great. But I think what we need to do is we need to start empowering design and designers and creative solutions into those type of projects. And so really, unfortunately, you look at the level of respect that designers and people in the creative field get in Japan compared to their counterparts in other countries or other markets. It's almost appalling, because I mean, they're seen as okay, this creative designer can make the PowerPoint look nice, or can make
Oh my gosh, yeah.
they can make
Can
it
you have
beautiful.
can you have a look at the PowerPoint? Yes.
Right.
Can you make the
But if
logo
you can
or
have the
something?
designer, you can have put the designer actually more upstream and actually say, okay, what's the strategy? What is a customer? And oftentimes the designer, because if you think about the methodology of design starts with the needs of the customer, right? So it's almost like they say, oh, well, design thinking. It's not, design thinking is not new. It's been around in industrial design for years, decades. But if you can have designers earlier in the process and think about, we're going to engineer this new AI solution for the customer, and having designers think about, okay, but what is the user interface going to be like? What is the experience for the inkanke, or like the human factors that actually person to person that are going to be happening? That right there, then all of a sudden you're engineering a solution with an eye on the customer. And I think that's really what's missing in a lot of business solutions in Japan today.
Absolutely. I think I'm absolutely with you in bringing the design, the design conversation, or even the design representative, to a higher level of conversation in the organization. So maybe that's, where the C-levels, start setting strategies, rather than kind of as the ship is already starting to set sail and then trying to kind of, build and adjust as you go along. Well, let's save ourselves the headaches and bring the designers in at the beginning. As much as I think that there's a responsibility for the designers, let's put it the other way around, I think that there's a responsibility for the business people to respect design. I do think there's an opportunity for design professionals to also bring the business case when they do have a conversation. And you've done this, for example, very well. In your papers that you've published about metrics, and particularly at Forster, things like that. And so I think in order to have that kind of business design conversation, I think that there's going to have to be an adjustment from both sides. How do you see that?
Yeah, I think one is for me as a leader of the Experience Center of PwC in Japan, is I bring in designers in almost every conversation I have with either the client or the partners, internal partners, for example. And even if initially they're just listening, I always will empower them to have a voice in the conversation, either talking about what are their opinions on the potential solution, what is their ideas. And I think it's not discounting the fact that maybe they may be younger, or they may be more junior, or they may not have the business acumen that some of the people that are in the room. Otherwise, I think it's so important to actually empower the designers to have a voice in those conversations, and give a fresh perspective, because almost, I would say 99% of the time, and I would even argue probably it's 100% if I look back at it, actually, they will bring something valuable to the table that otherwise no one thought about. And I think that is it. I think that right there is invaluable. And even if it's a simple question, well, that doesn't make sense. Why does the customer have to do this? Or why does the user have to think about this first? Maybe we got to eliminate the cognitive load at the beginning of the signing process, or something like that. Then all of a sudden I'm thinking, wow, that's a really smart idea. It seemed like a very simple question, but it's actually something that we didn't think about. And so I think part of me coming back to work in Japan was really about transforming or accelerating this transformation within companies, but actually using design to do that, and empowering designers to help me do that. Is my mission.
Well, tell us more about that. Tell us more about what you wish that your customers would know, and maybe what even your kind of current challenges are, and what maybe what's on that, what's driving your mission now.
Well, so I'm not advertising for PwC at all, but I mean, something that we do across the organization is we approach every client engagement and work that we do with this, what we call is a BXT methodology. And so BXT stands for B is business, X is experience, and T is for technology. So it's BXT. So traditional consultants would always come to a client and say, yes, we understand your business, we understand all the financials, we can tell you everything about why this makes sense, and we have the perfect technology solution for you. And then we throw an SAP implementation or whatever, some large platform at, right?
Right.
So I think the idea now with BXD is that, okay, yes, we have the business rationale why this makes sense. We understand the technology that you need to use. And now we need to think about, okay, how's this going to impact the users, the employees that are going to do this? How is that going to then how the customers are going to be impacted? So it's actually bringing this experience lens to all of our solutions. So what keeps me up at night and what actually I try to teach all of my, not only colleagues, but also clients is, let's put an experience lens on this traditional problem and actually understand, like, okay, how are the customers going to be impacted? How are the employees going to be impacted? And how can we actually think about using design and a creative problem-solving methodology such as design thinking, come up with a solution that would unlock new value that wouldn't have already existed before.
I think that's so special, really, because when you start thinking, it has really for a long time been about simply business and technology. But when we do add that experience lens, there is something, and it's not even that different, for example, from Japanese culture. Like when you do talk about omotenashi and this idea to delight the customer, I do just think the implementation of omotenashi to customer experience, I just think there's a gap there. And I think that, people like yourself are doing a great job in terms of closing that gap. What are some of the things that you kind of would wish that in, for example, maybe 3 years or 5 years from now, what are some of those principles that you hold that you wish that Japanese organizations would then kind of almost take for granted, that in 5 years from now, that this is kind of the new way that we do business? What are some of those things that you would encourage particularly your Japanese customers to do?
Right. So I think I'll give you one example. So we were working with a client on a new application, and their attitude of the senior leadership was, no one's going to use an application for us. They just want to talk to actually real people. They just want to call the call center. They just, Japan is a motenashi culture. Everyone actually, they need to feel the actual human emotional touch of from the company to really feel safe. And so it sounds like almost like a very cliche type example, but it's absolutely true. And really, it's the idea. It's like, well, do you think maybe 5-10 years ago, someone would have gotten on their mobile phone, tried to find out some random person driving around a car, and then transact with them and say, hey, can you pick me up in the middle of the night and drive me to my friend's house? And I'm gonna go get in the back of your car and I'll pay you money for it. And so it's the idea that's like, people don't really know, just they don't accept it because they've just never been exposed to it and they've never seen it. So I wish, if I could leave some type of long-term impact on my clients or in Japan, it's the idea that it's exposing them to the idea that there is innovative ideas out there that are just hanging right there in front of your face, that actually we just need to become comfortable with, and then all of a sudden things just fall in behind it. And so people often quote the Henry Ford idea, which is when he obviously he said that if you would ask customers what they wanted, they would have said they wanted a faster horse because they didn't know a car existed. And so the idea that showing that a car is possible in Japan, or this X innovation is possible in Japan, will open people's eyes that it is possible. And for me, that is super powerful, and it's something that drives me.
Yeah. I think, and when I've spoken to people about this as well, particularly Japanese clients, and there's this idea that you don't want to assume, the idea, okyaksan kami-sama desu, like these kinds of ideas, that you don't want to be presumptuous with what a client might want, in a way almost being ill motivated or something. But I found that when your motivation is, I'm showing you something new because I'm connected to either an ecosystem or whatever it is that has access to new ideas, and maybe you don't. So my job is to bring you new things that might serve you, that might make your life easier, that may make your life better. That when you introduce that with a learning mindset and an empathetic mindset, rather than the, well, this is what everyone's doing, so you should be doing it. I found that it that people do are open to that. So I think it's when it does come to, those new ideas that you were mentioning, my wish, and this is also building on your idea, is I want people to take chances and to open these conversations, and know that they don't have to be perfect. And when you do it with, good intentions, I found that people appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it comes down to, unfortunately, is this just the idea that there still is this hesitation to take risk in Japan, I feel like. And within organizations, no one necessarily wants to own the innovative new idea, because if it
Right.
falls down, then potentially that's going to impact their career. Or,
That's right.
it's the idea that if people became a little bit more comfortable with, okay, accepting failure and saying, you know, they say, fail fast, fail forward. So I mean, I learned something off of what didn't work out, and we're going to move forward on it. Until that can change, and until they can kind of have a little bit of a higher level of comfort with the idea that we're not going to have the best, most perfect solution today, but we're going to hopefully learn from it. I think that's going to be a key to doing what you talked about, Brittany, which was, learning and progressing and trying to iteratively create something that ultimately is going to be the best for the customer and for the society, for Japan.
Yeah. Ryan, we talked about, you just mentioned obviously that there's this idea of, the like risk adverse and change and things like that. But we're currently, all living through what is now our not so new anymore normal, which is this kind of,
Mm-hmm.
COVID-19. So Japanese companies, I think if you ask a Japanese company at the beginning of the year, are you prepared to, from one day to the next, enable all of your employees to work from home and create these kind of remote experiences?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many would have said yes. So if we think about
Right.
this, not simply just the current COVID experience that we're all kind of living through, but if we think about maybe what COVID might represent, i.e., being a catalyst for change, what do you see in your experience center that might be the opportunities behind this kind of very, very unwelcomed, but yet quite effective catalyst for change, being COVID-19 in Japan?
Sure. We certainly, there's a lot of obviously there's a lot of travesty and bad and terrible things are with COVID. But if you think
Absolutely.
about the silver lining, there's a lot of actual benefits that people probably don't recognize as are not so as obvious, I guess. And obviously one of that is this the acceleration for this new way of working. And it's almost like, even though, Brittany, you and I have met face to face before,
Yeah.
but now you see, like, in people's homes, and you see, like, now all of a sudden it's like a new level of intimacy that we're developing.
Yeah.
And I feel like um, we're not only doing that, but we're also developing another level of trust too, because I've got employees that are working remotely. I don't see what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, but as long as we're collectively working towards the results to finish a project, or
Mm.
or working on a pitch or something like that, then obviously it's another type of level of trust that's being developed. So I think you look at, there are a number of benefits to that, and I think that my hope is that once COVID kind of maybe passes, or the pandemic passes, is that things don't necessarily swing all the way back and go back to the way they used to be, because
Mm.
I think we've made a lot of progress, not only in Japan but around the world, to accelerating this new way of working and this healthy life work balance. And I feel like I can only hope that that continues and continues to get better as well. So we maybe have some face-to-face meetings, some online, and vice versa. So,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
and ultimately, hopefully it helps the planet as well, right?
That's it. That's it, absolutely. If
Yeah.
the Business Karaoke podcast people often are already, followers of this creed, they're followers of innovation, they're followers of customer experience,
Mhm.
but often they lack allies internally. The idea that, I believe that, we might be able to do something in a more customer experience way, or we might be able to implement innovation here or bring empathy to our customer in this particular engagement. What kind of advice would you give people that believe kind of what we believe when it comes to customer experience, but don't necessarily have the allies internally yet to create that kind of movement or that kind of change? What kind of advice would you have for them?
Sure. So this is something that I learned firsthand. So when I used to be a banker. I used to be a banker here in Japan. I used to work for HSBC, and I noticed that, for example, if you want to create change in an organization, so the traditional way is, okay, whatever is the most valuable part of the organization is an area that you should focus on first, because obviously, if you make if you make some sizable improvement in one area that's highly profitable, obviously that's gonna be profitable for everyone. Let's say if you were talking to a bank, let's say, and you talk about, let's say, the high net worth individuals or the people in the private bank, they are generating a lot of revenue, but also they have very, very carefully cultivated relationships with their private and high net worth individuals. So oftentimes those people don't want you to have anything to do with their customers, right? Because they're
Absolutely.
very
Yeah, yeah.
protective of them. So you can
Absolutely.
say, okay, we want to do this about customer experience. We want to bring your high net worth customers in and bring them and have interviews, and we want to do this and this. They would say, no way, you're not going to touch our customers.
Yeah.
We've had this customer for a decade. You're not going to ruin this relationship that I have. So then you say, okay, whilst that was that's a high profile and very profitable area of the business, maybe I need to find another area of the business that maybe is more willing to work with me. And so what I look when I'm looking for allies is, okay, well, who are people that are willing to listen and work with me? It might not be the the most obvious place to deliver like the most high profile impact, but at least it creates some type of momentum and create some type of lighthouse that says, okay, hey, I worked with the IT department, which is not sexy at all, and the IT department delivered X, Y, and Z, and all of a sudden it becomes a lighthouse that says, hey, everyone, let's go this direction right here because we did it and we showed that it works. And so then organically, other people will say, oh, you know what? I'll give that a try, or I'll try that as well. Maybe we can get senior leadership on board that says, okay, they did this. This seemed like nonsensical at first, but we tried it and they actually showed tangible gains. So maybe let's now expand that to other groups or other departments. And so I think that's also a really powerful way to start inciting a movement or sparking a movement is who are like the willing, like the what is it called, the land of the willing, or the people that are actually happy to work with you and are open to what it is that you're trying to do, is a good place to start when building allies.
Hmm. Yeah, that's
Because
so that.
otherwise, because you're just pushing water uphill, trying to do things with people that don't want to work with you or they don't want to change, and that's going to not only tire you out, but it's actually not going to. It's just going to be a lot of wasted effort in the
Mhm.
end, maybe, when you could be making an impact with someone maybe that's more willing.
Absolutely. I also think that there might even be, building on that idea, there's also sometimes a little bit more safety in testing it internally. So, for example, if you want to try like customer
Mm-hmm.
experience, try to even find like an internal opportunity before you go out to the customer. So then when you do, for example, go to the high net worth individual account manager, you can say, well, we've done this internally and these were our results. And so, for example, it's about just creating those little wins, and then that then contributing to
Yeah,
kind of more of a success case, so that you can say, hey, let's do something of impact.
you're absolutely right, Brittany. Yeah, that's exactly right. Um, and then in always starting small. So you're not going to roll out something to 1,000 customers. You're going to start by rolling it out to 5 customers maybe. And those 5 customers are friends of yours or friends of someone else. So like it's okay to fail with them. And then maybe they give you feedback. And then all of a sudden you go from 5 customers to 15 customers, then 50 customers. Then all of a sudden you're at 100 customers. And so you just start small and then you start expanding that. And that's a best practice as well.
And Ryan, to wrap up, is there something about customer experience that that's on your heart that you feel maybe we just don't talk about enough as a society, or even, particularly in Japan? Is there something particularly about customer experience that we don't talk enough about?
I think the parting idea that I'd like to tell everyone is to think about, it's not just about customer experience. I mean, you have to think about experience across the ecosystem. So you have guest experience, you have patient experience, you have partner experience, you've got employee experience. So in general, if you think about it, that entire management of that, and the proactive design and measurement and strategizing around experience, I call it is experience management. So it's actually XM, not CX, it's actually XM. And unfortunately, SAP in Qualtrics they've already trademark that name, but I think experience management really is the idea that if people think a little bit broader, it's not always about just trying to focus on the customer, but it's also all these the users and all these other people as well.
Ryan, thank you so much. We've been able to have someone who's not only able to comment on global best practice, but to also give us so much insight into Japan domestically, because at the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to do, is that we're really trying to leverage that global best practice and then, feed that through a Japanese lens so that we really can start, evangelizing and leading change in Japan. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much, Brittany.
Yeah, and come back anytime and update us on customer experience in Japan, because this is something that I'm really looking forward to see what it looks like in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years. I'll be following closely.
Sure. Thank you so much, Brittany. I really appreciate it.